All right, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the process of adding a deformation rig to our character. Now, typically when you work with characters and with rigs, there are two kinds of rigs that really function together. The first is your deformation rig. This is just the bones or joints that are going to manipulate the geometry. So these are the joints or bones that are directly weighted to the model that you've made. The other type of rig is a control rig, and this is what's typically used by an animator in order to move things around. A control rig is going to have all kinds of curves or shapes in and around the model that are used for selecting various limbs or various things and allow the animator to control the character a little bit more precisely. Since what I'm doing is not going to require the services of an animator, I'm simply going to be using pre-built animations on this character. I don't need the control rig. So I am only going to be building thus just the deformation rig. So the joints that are going to go inside this character that are going to allow me to change up the pose and the position that all of the bits and pieces of the character are currently in. Now, before we go into doing any of the rigging, step number one is going to be doing a little bit of house cleaning. Now, what do I mean about when I say house cleaning? There are a few things that we want to do in the preparation of adding a rig, things that are just going to make our file a little bit cleaner, things that are going to allow for a little bit of an easier time going through and creating the joints and being able to kind of keep things just a little bit organized here in a way that we'll be able to find things and select things where we need them. So first, I have my character here split into different materials. I've gone and assigned a different material to each portion of the character that is going to get its own texture. So you can see based off what I've got here that her jacket and belt currently make up one texture. I've got her waistcoat, her pants, and her sash making up the second material. Her boots have a material, her hands have a material, her head has a material, and I've got an eye material on her here as well. There's also going to be a mouth texture, which contains the gums, the teeth, and tongue, as well as whatever kind of material I end up putting on her X-Gen generated hair, which I will do later. This I find a little distracting when I'm looking at it, when I'm trying to rig, having all of these colors here. Now I've gone and assigned each of these materials a different color, and I just kind of did this arbitrarily. But the reason behind this is that I want to be able to see where my different materials are. And so now that I've got that, I really don't want this to interfere with my rigging process. And so typically what I do is I go and use the default material here, icon inside of Maya, in order to just illustrate the character in this flat gray. It's going to make it a little bit easier on the eyes, and it's going to make it a little bit easier down the road as well, to make sure that we can see the joints while we're placing them. That's going to be really important, that we get these joints in the right place, that we get them where they're supposed to be. So that's kind of my first step. The next thing that I want to look at here is going to be inside of the channel box. And you can see that inside, I've got her pants selected currently. And inside the inputs here, I have several things. I have something called GeoCostume 2. Now that is the layer upon which I've added the pants. So GeoCostume 2, that's that layer there. And then I've got something called PolySplit. And I've got 53... 45 through 53. These are using the polygonal cut tool or the multi-cut tool. And what I've done is I've gone and added a few cuts here where I'm using triangulation to hold her geometry together in the shape that it's meant to be. Now, these are history nodes, and I don't want any history in this character. I've gone and selected only her pants here to illustrate this, but various pieces of her geometry are going to have history. So what I want to do is I just want to select all of her, and I'm going to go to edit, delete by type, and history. And what that's going to do is it's going to remove any non-essential inputs here from her mesh. So now what I've got is a very clean system. I've also been, while making my low poly, very cognizant of the fact that I'm going to need to keep everything separate. And so I've got various layers here. I first have a layer called shared, which currently only includes her head, her eyes, and her hands. I've got something called costume one, which is her typical player one costume kind of thing. And then I've got a second costume, which exists on a separate layer. So this is going to be two meshes, essentially two characters that are going to share the same rig. And I've got them separated by layers. So this is going to be important. I'm going to end up weight painting these things when we get to that stage independently, but they're going to share the same set of joints here inside of Maya. This is going to make it so that they can also, once in engine, share the same animations. So I've got that set up currently like this. Now I'm going to be using costume 2 here. It doesn't really matter which one that I use, but I've just kind of arbitrarily chosen that one as the one that I'm going to be using as I go and add the joints to her mesh. Now, what I want to do, I've got the other costume hidden, and what I want to make sure I've done is I'm going to go and set each of these layers to be a reference layer. So I'm going to click the final box here until it says R for reference. Now, what that does is it makes it so that I cannot select any of my geometry. That way, when I'm going and creating my joints and placing them in the right places here, I'm not going to accidentally select her jacket and move it around. The other thing that I want to do before getting into this as well is I want to bring in my avatar. So early on when we built this character, we started off in Marvelous Designer with a naked version of this anatomy. That naked version is going to be something that we can use to place the joints. And that's because we're going to see things on the anatomy a little bit clearer than we're going to be able to see them now that she's got this clothing on. So, for instance, things like her elbow, it might be a little bit hard to find exactly where the elbow joint is supposed to be. And so using the avatar, using the actual naked version of the model, is going to make it so I can see that, so that it is something that is going to be a little bit more visible. So I'm just going to go and temporarily bring that into my scene. I'm going to go to File, Import. I'm going to go up to my OBJ folder for this character, and I'm going to go and grab that avatar OBJ. Now, this should appear in exactly the same place as my character. Pardon me. As you can see here, I'm going to go and select that avatar so that we can see it. And you'll notice that like her hands line up exactly the same. Each finger's in exactly the same position. I have gone and corrected a little bit of the anatomy and the thumb here. There was a little bit of a concavity I didn't like. So I've gone and tweaked that. You can see that some of the shape of her face is a little bit different from where it was before. And again, that's because I've gone and sculpted her face. We've got a very generic head on here, and her feet don't actually line up with the boots. Again, her naked feet or her nude feet or bare feet are standing flat on the ground plane, whereas the version of her with boots is actually slightly below the ground plane. And this is another thing that I'm going to want to correct, because I want to make sure that when she's standing on the ground in the game, that ground is going to be the 0 plane. So I will actually need to turn these layers off. I'm going to turn the visibility of everything back on here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select absolutely everything that's in here with the exception of the avatar. Now, the reason for that, actually, we need the avatar as well. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to move them up until her boots are actually standing flat on the ground, like so. Now, it doesn't matter that her bare foot is floating. In fact, where I've put the heel of her boot, her foot is actually fitting directly in there. So her foot would be bent down to the ground and in the right place. So I'm going to mostly ignore what's going on with the foot. We're going to be using the boot here as a means of placing this. But I want to make sure that she's exactly where she's supposed to be here. Now, again, this has gone and altered her transforms, which we can't have. We don't want to have anything editing the transforms. And her pivot point for all of these components now is improperly placed. So this is, again, a little bit of house cleaning here that we want to make sure that this happens. So I'm going to go in and let's turn on Snap to Grid. I'm going to hit Insert. to move my pivot point only, and I'm going to put it back at the origin. I'll turn off insert so I'm no longer affecting my pivot point. And then I'm going to go into modify and freeze transformations. This should give us zeros and ones across the board here. So our translate and rotate all read 0, and our scale read 1. Also worth noting that you should probably make sure that when you look through the front camera, you see the front of the character. All right, make sure they're pointing in the right direction. This is kind of important as well. Now, I've got all of the geometry selected here, so I'm going to just one more time, because I've been making some changes. I'm going to go into Edit, Delete by Type, and delete its history so that we're all kind of locked in and good to go. The next thing that I want to do is just make sure, since we're going to be creating a rig for this character, that rig is indeed going to be easy to make. Maya's interface is split up here. So depending on what kind of job, what kind of work you're doing in Maya, you don't need to see the entirety of its interface. So right now, I'm currently in the modeling interface. I have the modeling shelf with all these little orange buttons here. And the menu system across the top is also that of the modeling menu. So we have things like mesh, mesh edit, mesh tools, mesh display, all things relating to construction. What we want to do is we want to switch the UI over to now that of the rigging. So using the drop down in the top left, I'm going to choose the rigging category, and that's going to change our menu system. So now we have things like skeleton, skin, and deform up in here. To change our shelf, I'm simply going to look at the little tabs above, and I'm going to go from the poly modeling over to the one called rigging. And I want to make sure that I've got all my little purple buttons here indicating the rigging tools that we are going to be using. I'm going to return my layers to the reference layer version, and you'll notice that my avatar that I've gone and added since creating those layers here is not in a layer. So I'm actually going to go and create a layer for this as well, which I'll just call avatar for now, layer, and I'll give it a color as well, though that's not really going to matter too much. But we're going to go and add selected objects, and again, that way I can turn that layer into a reference layer as well, so that I again can't select any of my geometry. Typically, when I get to this point and I'm pleased with how clean my file is, that I've got everything kind of set up the way that I want it to be set up, what I'll go and do is I'm going to say File, Save Scene As, and we're going to go and give this a new scene. So I'm going to go into my projects. We're going to go down into Star Trek. I'm going to go into my Maya folder here, and I'm going to give this a new scene name. So right now I have a file called Tapenna. That's the name of this character. And I'm going to go and add a file here called _rig. And that's going to be where I make my saves from here on in. So this way, if I want to go to make any changes to my geometry, or anything is incorrect with what I've built so far, I can always go back to it. I don't have to delete the rig and that kind of thing, but I can go back to just where my geometry was. So it's kind of a new launching or new stepping off point, if you will. So now that I've got that all saved, there are just a couple more things here that I want to ensure are turned on before I start doing the rig. This is just going to be to help us to visualize things or see things just a little bit clearer. So first, like I said, I've got this show default textures button turned on so that I don't see all of the bright, annoying colors that I've gone and applied to my model. Now, I could simply go and change the color of each of those materials, but since I have a button that kind of does that for me, I'm just going to turn that on. I'm going to turn off the textures node. Now, this character doesn't have any textures inside of Maya. I haven't bothered linking any of the textures inside of Maya, but turning that off is going to prevent Maya from trying to load or render textures. Now, even though they don't exist, this is going to help our performance a little bit, which is something you really want to have as real time as you can get it when you're doing rigging and that kind of thing. Because when you see something move, you want the movement to be as clear and as real time as possible. You don't want it to be kind of janky and slow or stuttering, that kind of thing. So turning off as much performance stuff as you can is going to be useful. Now you may also want to go into your renderer here and make sure that you're in viewport 2.0 and not working in Arnold. Again, Arnold is a higher end renderer. It's going to take a little bit more time for it to do anything, and thus it's going to slow down your work. The last thing I'm going to do before I actually go in here and create any joints is going to be using this little icon here. It's a little square, and inside of it looks like one of the joints from Maya, looking like the joint tool here, the little circle with a cone coming out of it. And what this does, this is called X-ray joints. And this is going to allow, when we create the joints, it's going to allow them to be visible on top of the geometry. So even though the joints for her spine are going to find themselves inside of her clothing here, I kind of actually don't really want the clothing to hide them. And so for that reason, turning this button on is going to make it so the joints render over top of the geometry, regardless as to where they are. It's also important to note that all of these settings here that I'm changing, the render style, the texture, the renderer, and the joint X-ray, all of these are viewport specific. These are viewport settings. So if I switch viewports, you'll see that none of those settings are in my left view here. None of those things are in here. I would have to go and turn them all on for this viewport as well. And so you're going to see this as I rig. I'm going to be bouncing back and forth between the various viewports based off what I need. And I'm going to go back and kind of adjust that. Now, my goal is to put this character on the hierarchy from the white robot from Unreal Engine 4. So I'm going to be using the layout and configuration of that rig. Though it's not entirely important that you do that, you can still get things to work by retargeting animations in Unreal. And so your skeleton can be different. And I also have a few joints that I'm going to need to make that, because of her clothing, are joints that I need that the white robot does not need. So they don't exist for that, but I do want them to exist for this. I'm going to begin by hiding now my 2 clothing layers so that we get down to the avatar. And this is going to be the easiest way to create the first few joints. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn on the joint tool. This is the little purple icon. It's the second one in on the shelf, and it is indicated by 2 joints at kind of an angle from each other. And the idea here is that we want to go and create a couple of nodes that we're going to use here. So we want to create a root and we want to create a pelvis. So I'm going to go in the side view here. And when I'm positioning this, what I'm trying to envision here in terms of where to put the joint for her pelvis is I want it to essentially be at the waistband of her belt. That's kind of the area where I envision her pelvis moving. So if I were to draw over top of this here, so you can kind of see what I'm envisioning, her waistband's going to be somewhere about here. And I can see that that's kind of the position where I would want to rotate her pelvis one way or the other. So if you think of her hanging from her arms here, or her hands hanging from monkey bars and swinging her legs back and forth, that's kind of the point where her pelvis is going to swing, right? Her pelvis being in this area here. So that's kind of what I want to do, is I want to get that joint to be there. And then I'm going to go and create a series of bones that are going to make up her spine. I'm going to try and create these here in the same way that they're created inside of the Unreal robot character, because that's going to be the easiest way to do this. So we're going to start off, as I said, with the joint tool. I'm in my side view here, and I'm going to go and place the first joint in that area. Now, they're really, really hard to see. For me, by default, this tool is setting my radius on these joints to be 0.5. We're going to go and adjust that in a moment. But I'm going to go and create this chain here first. So my first 2, this is going to be her pelvis. I'm then going to look at the bottom of her rib cage here, and I'm going to find kind of the middle point of that. and I'm going to put 2 joints up till there. So one here and one here. And then I'm going to place a second one midway up her rib cage, about there. And then I'm going to place one kind of at the collarbone, top of her shoulder area here. This is going to be the top of her rib cage. From there, I'm going to add one to the base of the head. So I'm kind of looking at the joint between the jawline and the back of the cranium. And then I'm going to place one at the top of her head. And when I'm done creating this chain, I'm going to hit enter. And that's going to get me out of this tool. And it's going to finish the chain for me. And I now have a series of joints over on the left-hand side here. You can see they are bound by a hierarchy, with the very first joint I created being the parentmost joint. And then joint 2, joint 3, joint 4, 5, 6, and 7, all children of each other going down. So we have a nice hierarchy here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to first select all of these joints, and I'm going to go and change the radius of them. So you can see they ended up with radii kind of all over the place. The first one starting at 0.5, looks like the last one ended up at 1.379. I'm going to set these to 2.5. Yeah, that's nice. I want to be able to see them pretty clearly here, and so that's not too bad like that. I can get a pretty good look at them now in terms of their position and where they excuse me, where they are. The next thing that I want to do is I want to go in and name these things. Okay, so I want to make sure that I'm not going to be stuck down the road with 75 joints, with joint 1 through 75 being the name. So as I create them, it's going to be kind of easy to name them this way. So I'm going to be using the names from the joints in the white robot guy. And I'll go and just put those names in here. So pelvis, and we got spine 1, we got spine _02, we've got spine _03. This is going to be neck _01, head. And now after the head, I've got a joint up in the top of the head here. This is what I'm going to be using as a nub. Now, the reason I use this is that the orientation of the joints is important. We want to make sure that if you look at my move tool here, I'm currently in world. But if I go and change that tool, that joint, to go from world to object, so it's pointing in the direction it's of its own hierarchy here, of its own orientation, we can see that every joint that I've created, X points at the next one down the train. Okay, so the pelvis, X points at spine 1. Spine 1 points at spine 2. Spine 2 points at spine 3. Spine 3 at spine 4, and so on, all the way up. In order for the head to point directly upwards, I actually need a nub here. Now, I'm not going to end up weighting or weight painting anything to this joint, but I use it as a means of making sure that all of these joints can align to one another. So I'm going to go and rename this. I'm going to call it X nub _ head. And I use the X nub prefix here, using an X at the beginning of it, just because it'll put it later alphabetically in the list. I could call it Z nub. That X has nothing to do with anything. I call it nub because it is a nub, and it makes it easy to search for all of the X nub joints and be able to remove them from a selection or something like that. So that's what I'm going to be using that for. So there we have our first series of joints. Now, because these were created in the side view here, they have aligned themselves directly with the 0 plane here in YZ, which means they're right down the center of the character. And in this case, that's exactly what we want. Cool. Now we can move on to the next area. I'm now going to go and create the joints of her foot and leg. Now I'm going to bring one of the costumes back because I am going to need to see the joints of her foot. So actually, maybe while I'm positioning these things, I'll go and do that. Now, it's really important when you're placing these joints that we do one of two things. We move and we do not rotate. Okay? We do not want to rotate because that will change the orientation of the joints. We only want to move them. Moving them will not change their orientation. And I'm going to make sure when I do move them that I am moving them using that object space. Now, when I go and look at her leg here, one of the ways it's easy to kind of visualize where these joints should go is to almost imagine your character as being an action figure. So when I do that, I can see that her leg kind of has this circle area here where it lines up with her body. And, if you were to have a screw right through that area, that would give you a nice pivot for where her leg would move. Well, guess what? X marks the spot. That's where we're going to want to put that hip joint. The same thing is true with her leg, the lower leg and the upper leg here. If I were to envision, again, that upper leg having a socket like this and the lower leg also kind of containing that same socket, that gives me the hinge point of where this action figure would work. And again, that gives me where I'm going to put that knee joint. It also works with the ankle here. I can see where I'm going to want to put that ankle joint. And again, I'm going to have to turn on her boots because I know the ball of her foot is going to end up lower here. It's not going to end up where the nice flat foot I've created here is going to be. So that's kind of what I'm going to look at. Now I can actually, after drawing these, I can actually leave this on now that I've got this tool here. And I'll just switch over to my joint tool. And I can go and click inside each one of these things here to create these joints. So there's one there, there's one there, there's one there. And again, I'm going to go and turn the visibility of costume on. And I'm going to move this up here. It means that we don't need these things anymore. But I'm going to go and put this now down in her foot. And then I'll put the last one at the tip of her foot. And again, like I did before, I'm going to hit enter to accept and commit to that chain. Excellent. Now that that's done, I'm going to turn this back on and delete it. And I now have a leg joint in here, a series of leg joints. We're going to go and rename these as well. So using the naming convention of the Unreal character, this should be upper leg underscore L. This one is going to be lower leg underscore L. This one is going to be foot underscore L. Ball underscore L. And then again, I've got another nub here. So this is going to be X nub underscore foot underscore L. Like that. So again, the idea here is to try and create these things as best you can. Now I've gone and created all of the left side of her joints, and I'm going to be cloning these to the right side. Though I'm not going to do any cloning until we're done. And the reason for that is I want to get as much of this accurate as I can before going in and trying to duplicate everything. So I'm going to make sure that I'm as completely happy here with the exact layout of all this stuff before I go in and manipulate anything. Okay, so now that I have this done, the next thing that I want to do is I want to go and position this. So just like her spine, I'm going to name these things here. Let's also go and set the radius here. I'm going to go to 2.5 again, make them nice and big and chunky. So like her spine, because these were created in the side view, in the side viewport, it means that they're actually not aligned to her leg in any way. They are kind of over to the side. Now I know that from the side, they're exactly where I want them. So what I need to do is I need to move them until they line up with what I want. I'm going to go and turn my snaps off here that I had left on from before. And I want to go and move this. Now I'm going to try and do this from the front view. We're going to make a few changes here in the front view as well. And what I'm going to try and do here is I want to try and place this kind of accurately inside of her hip. Now, again, her clothing is really obstructing my view of where that leg is exactly. So I'm going to hide the costume momentarily. And now I can see, oh, okay, that's good. I am right in the middle of that kind of crease. Again, visually, what I'm looking at, I'm kind of trying to imagine this as being an action figure. And I'm seeing that there's a line that goes right here, right? That's where the this action figure would kind of pivot from. And that's really where I want this joint to go, is somewhere on that line. So right about there. It looks pretty good to me. Next, I have to go and move the knee. And I'm going to move the knee over. Again, placing it as centered in the knee as I can. I'm going to grab the ball of the foot, or the ankle, sorry. And I'm going to place that there. And I'm going to switch over to the top view because this will make it easier to see from this point of view. Again, we'll change our render settings so that we can see everything here. And I'm going to grab the ball of her foot, and I'm going to move this over until it's about there. I'm going to bring that costume back again and hide the avatar momentarily because, again, I can kind of see the way that this is going to affect her foot. And I'll bring the nub also over. So we should end up with a pretty straight line here between each of these joints from one to the next as it goes through her leg. Now this will have screwed up the orientations. The joints are now not pointing X towards the child, and that's fine. We actually have a fix for that we're going to do down the road. We just first need to get these things to line up positionally here as best we can. So I'm kind of trying to position my camera looking straight on down her boot here to make sure that this is as clean and straight a line as possible. Okay, I'm pretty pleased with the way that that's working. I'm going to hide the costume again. I'm going to bring the avatar back. I'm going to return to my side view here, and I'm going to go in and start creating the joints of her arm. I will return to the joint tool. I'm going to start at her clavicle, which is the first joint of the arm, followed by her shoulder, her elbow, her wrist, and I'm going to hit enter there. We'll worry about the hand in a moment. We want to first get the joints of her arm in the correct place. So again, I'm going to go in and name these things. We want to make sure that they're set to a nice big radii so that we can see them. So again, I've gone and set mine to 2.5. And then we're going to go and rename these. So the first one is going to be clavicle _L. Now, I do believe actually in the hierarchy list of the white robot, I've been using camel case here, making a capital letter in each one. I do believe there's actually no capital letters in the white robot guy. So I would have to go and correct that. It is going to be case sensitive when you try and use things like that, and it can break if you're not absolutely careful. And so maybe I'll switch over here to doing that, and I'll rename these things. So upper arm _L, and that's the L as well, needs to be lowercase. After the upper arm, we have the lower arm _L, and then the last joint I created is going to be hand L. Like so. So I'll go in and quickly alter these here. So pelvis with a lowercase p, and the spine with a lowercase s. Again, making sure I don't accidentally change the spelling of something here as well. Head. Now you'll notice head got a 2 beside it, and that can kind of cause some screwiness here. I'm going to go in and rename it to head lowercase, and that kind of fixes it. Maya does not like having objects with the same name, and it will often put a number beside it if you're not careful. So having them nested in a hierarchy actually prevents it from doing that as well. So here we're going to go into the upper leg, and I'll just change it to a lowercase u and a lowercase l, lowercase l and lowercase L. And it looks like I actually was even inconsistent here as I did this. And there's a lowercase L on the side of all of the foot or the leg joints, which is would have been a problem too. I wasn't even consistent when I did this. I'm going to leave the nubs with their capitalization. And that's, again, just a way of being able to see them a little bit clearer because they're not going to really change anything in Unreal. I'm not really concerned about them. So clavicle, lower arm, hand. Okay, so we're back to where we were originally. So excellent. Let's go and now start looking at positioning these things here. So the first thing that I want to place is going to be her clavicle. So if we look at kind of, again, anatomically where the clavicle is here, she's got her Acromion process of the scapula, we're going to see visible there, and her clavicle is going to be this kind of S-shaped thing that curves up towards it. Now you see a lot of people rig with the arms at a parallel here, and one of the reasons I don't agree with that is that most of those riggers and animators, when they do that, they don't animate the clavicle. Your clavicle is near parallel to the ground. It's not actually parallel to the ground when your arms are out like this. It's even lower when your arms are at your side. But we've got our arms open up a little bit here, so the clavicle is going to be up a little bit. When your arm is parallel to the ground like this, when you've got your shoulder and your forearm kind of in this position, your clavicle actually goes up quite a bit. They form a V in your neck here, and that's because your clavicle is the first joint in your arm. But most people, when they rig the arms this way, don't do that. They don't animate the clavicle. They just make the clavicle where it is when the arms are down. This results when they then animate the arms down in this kind of really broad shoulder on characters. It makes them look really big and boxy, kind of like they're walking around saying, I don't know, like they've got their shoulders up in the air, which doesn't really look good. You've got to make sure you're adhering to the anatomy when you do this. And so her shoulders are down, which means her clavicles are slightly raised, and that's what I want to pay attention to. So I'm going to first put this kind of at the beginning where her clavicle is, right? Somewhere in below her neck here. And then we can go into the next joint, which is her upper arm. And I'll bring that over and into her shoulder. Somewhere about there. I'm going to go down to the lower arm and place this in her elbow, followed by the wrist, which I'll point in here. Now, I am going to go back into my, I was in my 3D viewport, and I do want to make sure, again, I'm kind of looking at where that elbow is. That's looking pretty close. This is our olecranon here, olecranon, the end or the nub, the little finger of bone that's off her ulna. And that's where that rotation should be. It should actually be very close to that area. That looks pretty good. I just want to make sure that, you know, front and back. I'm going to hide the shared geo here too. It's giving me some doubling. That looks okay. And then same deal with her wrist here. I kind of want to make sure that this is positioned as accurately as I can get it inside of this this part of her hand. Now, this joint too is going to need something at which to point. You can see that if I were to try and animate this now, my rotation axis here doesn't actually line up with the positioning of that joint. And so what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to create another joint. I'm just going to do this temporarily here. I'm going to create a joint in between her fingers, like so. So the way that I did that was I went back to my joint tool and I clicked on the end joint. In this case, it was her hand. That selected that joint as the starting point of my new joint. And then I clicked in between her middle and ring finger. And that moved the next joint down there. So it actually put it in the hierarchy. Now this also isn't important. I can also just, now that I've hit enter, I could just click another joint and middle mouse drag it onto the hand and it'll create that connection as well. But I just find it a little bit easier. I have the tool selected already. And so I will just go in and link them in that way. Now I will have to move that joint because it didn't end up exactly where I wanted to. And again, this is going to affect the orientation of her wrist here, making sure that, you know, this joint that is a part of her hand is going to move the right way. Now I may move it back just a little bit because I'm going to need to create joints for her knuckles, which are going to go in obviously in each of her fingers. And I just don't want to have a lot of overlap here. So if I maybe go and put this kind of in the palm of her hand a little bit, that's not too bad. Now I'm not going to be adding carpals to her hand. So a lot of times you get another joint that's going to go in each finger here. Again, because I'm mimicking the hierarchy of Mr. White Robot Unreal character. He doesn't have the carpals, and so I don't want to place them either. But if I were doing a kind of a higher end character, you know, that would definitely be something you want to do. Your hand has the ability to kind of create a little bit of a bowl with your carpals kind of bending a little bit. But there, we're going to put that there. I'm going to go and rename this joint as well, this new one that I've made here. Open this back up. This is going to be xnub_hand_l. And there we go. I now have a nub for the hand. All right. So we're in pretty good shape here. We've got most of anatomically the body put together. There's a few other things that I would like to be able to do. I don't have our eyes in this head, but I do have them in this head. I'm going to switch from avatar now to shared. I'm going to go to my side view. We're going to go take a look at her head here. And I'm going to add several joints for the eyes. I'd like to be able to make her blink. Now, I'm not going to go for a full facial rig. I'm not going to make this a character that can emote and talk and do things like that. That would require a lot of joints in the face and, the ability to move her mouth and stuff like that. It's not really what I'm after here. I just want to be able to pose her in the engine and have her look a little bit more dynamic. But if I'm doing a turntable, I'm having the camera kind of fly around to take a look at this character or render this character, it would be nice to, have her blink and make it just look a little bit more real in that regard. And so what I need to do in order to make that work is go and throw some joints in for her eyeballs. This is what's going to make them animate the right way. So I need to make sure that my joint is evenly placed here. I'm going to worry about parenting these later. I'm just going to try and find the middle of the eye. And then I'm going to place a nub at the front of the eye here too. Okay, let's go into the top view. I'm going to also go into X-ray mode. I'm going to hide the grid just to try and make this a little bit easier in the eyes. And I'm going to grab that main joint. And again, I'm going to try and place it as central to the eye here as I can get it. And I also need to move my nub. So her eyes are kind of pointed out a little bit. She's a little wall-eyed here, which is pretty natural that we have our eyes kind of pointed out slightly that way. Yeah, I think that's going to work. So I want to go and rename these joints now in order to make sure that I don't lose track of what they are. I'm going to end up with quite a few joints here, so I do want to be very careful with what I do. So this is going to be I_L. That's her left eye. And this is going to be the X nub _I_L. So this gives me now the eye joint and the nub. The next thing that I want to do is give her some eyelid joints. Now, because we want the eyelids to move over the eyes in as believable a way as possible, they're actually just going to exist in exactly the same place here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start by cloning these two joints. So I've grabbed the eye and the nub, and I'm going to hit Control D. That's going to duplicate. And then I'm going to go and rename these. So this is going to be eyelid _upper. Actually, let's use the naming convention here that we've used for the joints. So it was upper arm. So I'm going to use this upper eyelid. And then this is going to be _L. But I'm also going to put upper eyelid center, since we're going to have varying eye joints here. The next thing that I need to do is I need to move this up until it is inside of the eyelid. So that's where that joint's orientation is going to work that way. That's going to work. I need to rename the eye nub that I have here. So this is eyelid upper, eyelid center _L. Excellent. So now that I have that, I can go and make another clone. So I'm going to select the same two joints again, Control D to duplicate again, and we'll go and rename these. So instead of upper, I'll rename them, you guessed it, lower eyelid center, and X nub lower eyelid center, like that. And again, this is going to make it so that I can move the lower joint or the lower lid. So we're going to go and move this down here and place it into the lower lid, just like that. Now with those joints in place, we've got something to control the middle of the eyelid, but we don't want the amount of motion that we're going to get in the eyelid here to be consistent all the way through. So I will typically put another joint on either side when I do the eyelid. It makes weight painting a little bit more complicated in this area. You can absolutely do it with an upper lid and lower lid joint. But I do find it just as easy to make additional joints and place them here. So one that kind of controls almost halfway between where I am here in the center to the corner, I'll put another joint there. And then the same thing with the center to the inner corner, I'll put another joint there. I'm not going to do that for the case of this video. I'm just going to use the simple version of an upper lid and a lower lid like that. Now, these need to be parented to her head. I need to make sure that when her head is animated, when there's an animation here and the head moves around, that the eye remains parented to the head. So to do that, we're going to select the main joints that we've made here, the parentmost joints. So this is eye left, upper eyelid center left, and lower eyelid center left. And I'm just going to middle mouse drag those onto her head. Doing that will reset their parentage here, or reset the hierarchy, parenting those new joints to the joint that was made there. So now if I go and grab the joint from her head and I tilt it side to side, you can see that that eye system is going to go with it. It also created a connection here from the base of her neck outwards towards that eye. So that's going to work quite nicely like that. We now should go in and start creating the joints of her hand. I've got to go and create a lot of finger joints here. I'm going to go in and just make sure, again, that all of my joints are set to 2.5 here in their scale. Actually, maybe I'll keep everything at 2.5. Now, let's undo that. I'm going to select the new ones that I made in the eye, and I'll set them to 1. And then I'm going to set the last joints in her hand here to be 1 as well. Go and put a 1 in here. I don't want them to be so large that I can't see the hierarchy and how things are connected. Okay, so with that done, we can go and start working on our hand. So I'm going to go back in my side view. I'm going to get back out of wireframe view here. And I can go in and start creating the joints for her fingers. Now, it's important that you can visually identify where the knuckles are, right? Where the actual bulge is of the knuckles so that you can place the joint in the right area, making sure that it does deform the right way. You can see, I can see this pretty clearly. Again, trying to envision this like an action figure where you would have a joint, kind of built in that way where you can see where it would rotate to keep it in the right place. That makes it really easy to kind of see where these joints would go in terms of keeping them together. Now, while I'm not going to create carpals for the fingers, I'm going to create a carpal for the thumb. Again, this is just lining up with the naming and the structure of the skeleton from Unreal. So what they have in Unreal is they have the carpal for the thumb, and then they have the 2 joints for the thumb. Okay, in the fingers, typically you have a carpal here as well, and then you have the 1, 2, and 3 joints that make up the fingers, but they don't do the carpals. So we're not going to do that joint there. We're just going to do the fingers all the way down. And then as before, I'm going to put nubs in place so that, again, we can set up our orientation later and make sure that that works correctly. So we'll go and delete these. I'll go back into my joint tool, and I will begin with the thumb, and we'll click somewhere inside of where that carpal is going to begin, somewhere deep in the meat of the hand. In that first knuckle, in that second knuckle, and then at the tip of the thumb, which I'm going to hit enter to accept, and I'm going to move this one back just a little bit. And then again, in 3D, we need to go and orient these things a little bit better. Now, typically when I do this, I'm going to try and align my camera here so that I can see the center line of the thumb. That's typically going to help me get this into a better position here so that I can actually make sure that these joints, right, I should see them follow that same center line as I go here. So trying to line these up a little bit like this. It should be a fairly straight line through the thumb. Yeah, I think that's going to work quite nicely. I'm pretty pleased with the way that that's working. Okay, so naming. We're going to go and open this up. This is going to be thumb underscore, I think this is thumb1 underscore L. We'll go to the next one, and we've got thumb02 underscore L, thumb03 underscore L, and then finally xnub underscore thumb underscore L. So now we've got the joints for the thumb made. I'll return to my side view here. Again, this is probably the easiest angle at which I can see the fingers and their orientation. We're going to go in and start with the knuckle, 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 and then tip of the index here. I'm going to hit enter to accept those changes. I might as well go name them. Again, the order, naming, positioning doesn't matter. You can do this whatever order you want. This is going to be index underscore, nope, index 01 underscore L. We're going to get index 02 underscore L. Index 03 underscore L. And finally, xnub underscore index underscore L. Okay, we'll return to our perspective view. We're going to grab the base of that index and we'll go and slide it out until it's where we want it to be. So I'm kind of trying to envision where that rotation point in that finger would be. Trying to line this up here with the side of the finger so I can kind of get these depth-wise into the right area. And again, I'll try and look at the finger here, try and get this lined up in a way that we're looking along that center line, which isn't always possible, but you can kind of see it a little bit here. That's not too bad. Okay. Now, instead of going and creating the all of the other fingers independently like that, I can just grab what is my index here and Control D, duplicate it. We're going to go to the root joint, and I will move this into the next finger, like so. So again, I'm going to try to line this up with where the rotation point is of that finger. Try and get it as close as I can. Again, this finger is going to be raised a little bit, and it should be forward a little bit of the index. We should get almost like the angle change that you get between your index, middle ring, and pinky. You should get the same thing angle-wise with the knuckles. So you should actually get your index set back a little bit, followed by your middle, and then your ring and your pinky kind of trailing off to the side like that. That same pattern kind of exists all the way through the finger. And so I want to make sure that this is forward a little bit. Again, do not use rotations when you're placing these. The only thing that we want is just to affect position. Okay, and we'll go and grab this one, bring it down here. Now again, I need to look at this finger in terms of where those knuckles are to make sure that I'm getting this in the right place. So this finger is longer, so each of these joints is going to get manipulated and moved a little bit into that longer digit position in order to give me things kind of moving where they're supposed to. So this guy got moved a little bit over. That's nice and straight, or as close to it, I think, as I'm going to be getting. Not too bad. This could probably come over a little bit. Okay. Again, we're going to go and rename these. So this is going to be middle, 01 underscore L. I'm going to go and copy the middle O, which will make renaming all of this faster. So middle 02 and middle 03. And then X nub middle left. Again, I'll grab all of the middle digits. Actually, it might be easier to use the index here because I'm doing the ring finger now, and the ring finger and index finger are often closer in scale to one another. So we'll grab just the root. We'll move this over. I'm going to set it back just a little bit again. Again, I'm going to have to move it forward as well. Not too bad. We're going to go and manipulate these joints and put them again inside the knuckles. The nub. Remaining at the nub. Try and align it here to make sure that it's as straight as I can get it. That's actually pretty decent. And then we can go and rename these as well. So again, I'm going to remove the index O. I'm going to call this ring O, which I'll copy. I'll remove the 1 from the end. And then we can go and rename the rest by simply pasting. Again, making sure that I lose the right number of characters here. And finally, just remove index in favor of ring. Ring O1L, ring O2L, ring O3L, and ring nub. Okay. And then lastly, we'll copy the rings. Again, Control D to duplicate. Open up this, and we can go name them right out of the gate. So this is going to be Pinky O, which I'll copy. Remove the 1 at the end. Paste over the other joints. And rename that one. Excellent. And then I'm going to go and place this inside of her pinky. Followed by following these up inside of her knuckles. All right, I'm pretty pleased with where that one is. This one's going to move out just a little bit. Again, I want to make sure I get them as straight as I can. Something like that. Okay. I'm going to go and parent these now to the hand. So I'm going to grab the root of the thumb, the root of the index, the root of the middle, the root of the ring, and the root of the pinky, followed by the root of the hand. And I'm going to hit P on my keyboard, and that'll parent them together. So now when her hand moves, or the joint that is going to be her wrist, when this moves, all of the fingers will go with it, which is exactly what we want. We can go and parent her thigh to her pelvis, which is another important one here. So I'm going to grab the upper leg, middle mouse drag that onto her pelvis, so that again, we have another joint here connecting these things together. I need to do the same thing with her clavicle. I need to parent her clavicle. Now, the parent of her clavicle is going to be this joint down here, spine 3. We'll grab this, shift click that one, try that again. Grab her clavicle, shift click the spine, and hit P to join them. So I'm going to get this joint sticking up here to grab her clavicle. This is going to ensure that when her rib cage moves, the joints that are in her rib cage anyway, once her rib cage moves, that her arm is going to move with it, which is good. So we've got most of what we need here. There's only just a few more things I want to add. So she has the ability to move her eyes. That's going to be good. I'm going to also add the ability for her breasts to move a little bit. I'm going to bring back the anatomical version of her and hide the shared version of her again. And the reason I'm going to do this is that, well, breasts move. And, you know, I'm not going to get carried away and have these, you know, dead or alive jiggly things moving around. But just having a slight bit of motion there, so I have this secondary action to the character moving, is going to look and feel believable. And that's kind of what I'm after. So to place joints inside of our breasts to make them work, there's a couple of things that we kind of want to make sure that we are doing correctly here. First and foremost, it's important to note that her breasts don't point forward. They point out at an angle, and they meet where the spine is. So they're kind of going to point out from her spine in that direction. So that means that when I make the joint, I'm also going to make the joint out in that direction. It's going to make sure that they move correctly. Now, the reason for this, the reason that they're angled, is that, remember, she's got a rib cage in here. She's got a rounded surface upon which that breast is placed. So the angle where the rib cage is here, it isn't flat pointing forward, it's rounded and it's kind of pointing out a little bit. So that's why we want to get those joints to point out in that way. Also, when you do your character, depending on how large the character's breasts are, we also want to kind of make sure that we've got the joint pointing in the right direction here for movement. So again, I'm kind of envisioning the fact that she's got a rib cage in here, right? That's where her rib cage is going to go. And the bone is going to stick out to her breast here. Now, typically what I will do is I will try and find the center of mass of where the breast is here. And that's where I'm going to put the main joint. And I will put the nub in the nipple. And that's going to give me the forward or horizontal axis that I want for this to work properly as well. Now, if the character had larger breasts, if she was a larger woman, then you might actually have the nipple point down a little bit, which means, again, that same center of mass area is going to be correct, but the nub is now going to point downwards a little bit. And if the character was wearing some kind of halter or push-up bra or something that was actually forcing the breast material up, then again, that nipple is going to be out here, while you get this underside here. So that's going to push it up in that way as well. So remember that there is clothing on top of this. We're not just doing naked breasts here, but presumably this lady is wearing a bra, and that there's going to be clothing on top of that, which is going to minimize how much movement we see. But that movement is still going to exist. And so that's why I'm going to do this. I'm going to, excuse me, I'm going to do this from my side view. I'm going to head down here. I'm going to head in my joint tool. And again, I'm kind of envisioning where that rib cage is. And I'm going to go and create the joints out like this. So I'll hit enter. We'll go back into our perspective view here. And we are going to go and reset the scale on these things. I'm going to set them to 1.5. I'm going to go to move. We'll start with the body of the breast. And I'm just going to move it outwards. And I'm looking for the center. And then I'm looking for the center. So I believe that should do it. It looks like maybe a little bit further. Bring this out just a little bit more. Excellent. Okay, I think that's going to work. Again, I want to parent this to her rib cage so that when her ribs move, right, we need to make sure that the breast goes with it, like so. There is a couple more things we need to do. First, right now, the parent-most joint in our skeleton is the pelvis. And that's cool. I mean, that is the area that we're going to move, and it's going to move everything else. But in order for the character to be able to walk on the ground, we actually need a more root oriented down here, something that's going to be on the ground in between her feet. This is what the game engine is going to understand as being the character's position in the world, not where her pelvis is. And that's because when she goes into the world and you place her on the ground, this is the thing that hits the ground. If her pelvis were to hit the ground, then she'd be half buried in the ground. So we need to make sure that when she stands on the ground, it's this point here that does that, right at the origin. So we're going to have a joint that's going to go up to her pelvis from the ground. And this is what's going to be called her root. It's the parent-most joint of the entire skeleton. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to ensure that I have nothing selected. No joints, no geometry, nothing at all. And I'm going to hit Control G. That's going to create a group, and I'm going to rename the group Root. Then I'm going to grab her pelvis. If I go and minimize her pelvis here, you can see the entirety of her skeleton's now in there. And I'm going to middle mouse drag that onto the root. Okay. Now the root is not a joint inside of Maya. It's just this group. But when this goes into Unreal, when it gets brought into an engine, that is going to be, in terms of the hierarchy, the parentmost node, giving us the ability to make that the position in the world. Now, with nothing selected and you create a group, it automatically puts it at the origin. And so for that reason, it is exactly where I want it to be. The next thing that we need to do is we need to create the rotational joints, the twist joints. So the skeleton from Unreal, the white robotic character, has several twist joints in his body. The position and hierarchical correlation between these joints is really, really, really important. And what these joints do to the skeleton is also really, really important. Twist joints are what allow the wrist to supinate and pronate, or twist around in place. We as human beings have pretty close to 360 degrees that we can rotate our wrist. You can put your hand palm up out at your side, and then you can twist it all the way around until it's palm up again. Now, that 360 degrees is not purely in the wrist. It's actually going through the entire arm. Most of it coming from the fact that you have a radius and an ulna, two joints or two bones in your forearm that twist around each other. This is what gives you that supination and pronation of your hand. You also get a fair amount of twist that happens between your shoulder socket and the actual bone itself. So the bone, obviously your humerus does not twist. It would snap if it did so. But you do get a fair amount in the shoulder girdle of rotation that you can get here as well, just by rotating and pivoting your shoulder. Some of that is also coming from the clavicle. And so we want to get that in place. We also want to make it so that the character can twist her foot and point her foot outwards more if she wants, or point it straight forwards if she wants. Now, typically in a human being, the knee and the foot always point in the same position. And so you don't typically need a twist bone in the lower leg, but the Unreal skeleton does have one there in the off chance that you do want to just slightly skew things. And then it's also got one midway up the femur. Again, your femur does not actually twist. But you do get a fair amount of twist in your hip socket. Again, there's a ball and socket joint that you get in your hip and in your shoulder, and those do allow for quite a bit of rotation. So typically, what we do, again, we don't want to rotate it actually at the socket, because you're going to get this twisting of the geometry here as it tries to go across that joint. But if we kind of taper that down the leg a little bit, where there's very little rotation up here, but then you get a lot of rotation down here, that kind of fall off, that gradient is going to make things work pretty well. So that's kind of what we're interested in. We're going to have that kind of tapering off work all over the place. To do this, I'm going to go and clone some of the joints that exist. But before I do that, I need to set up my orientation. So I'm going to be moving these joints. I'm going to be repositioning them. And in order to do so, I'm going to need to make sure that they're pointing in the right direction. Now, this is also related to the fact that, again, these joints should have X pointing towards their child. Now, in some instances where this joint here, for instance, in her ribs, there are several children, we're only dealing with just the first child created. So in this case, up to her clavicle or her collarbone, before going up into her head, or her neck into her head rather. And so let's go and fix our hierarchy here. I'm going to start with the root. I'm going to go all the way down to the nub of her foot. So I've got the entire hierarchy selected. I'm going to go into skeleton, orient joints, and we're going to use the options menu to pop this open. And when we orient the joints here to make sure that they're pointing in the right direction, there are a few things that we need to ensure are set up correctly. First, we want to make sure that the primary axis is X. This is the axis that is pointing at the next child down the chain. So X is the joint that we want to point. We then want to make sure that our secondary axis is also Y. This is the axis upon which our joints are going to rotate. So when we rotate her leg, if I go and select her leg here, we would want to make sure that Y is the axis upon which it rotates. So it's rotating in that direction kind of thing. And you can see that that's kind of set up in all of these joints already, which is good. Okay, so I'm going to go and select my entire rig again. And then we just want to make sure that we are orienting the children of the subject joint. And that we are reorienting. So we're going to use this kind of just the way I've got it set up here. So X, Y, Y, and making sure these are both set up. And then I'm going to hit Orient. And you should notice a little bit of a hiccup in your system. But now when we go and select any of the joints, we should actually get them so that no matter where they are, that X pointing at the child is completely correct. And this is where my X nubs have come in handy, is that they've allowed me to actually go and get that proper rotation out of the final joint. It actually has something at which to point. Now, again, all of our joints should only have translation data in them. There should not be any rotation data or scale data. So everything should have a scale of 1 and a rotate of 0, and they should have a translate of X with 0 and Y and 0 and Z. So that's beautiful. The next thing that we're going to go and do is we're going to go and align our joints a little bit better. So if we go look at some of these joints here, the way that they are placed is not indicative of them moving the way that we want them to. So for instance, if we look at our collarbone here, it's really nice and clean, right? Y is pointing straight up. Z is pointing out. That looks really, really nice. If I grab her shoulder joint here, I can see that Y is pointing directly out the shoulder joint. Z is pointing directly forward. And again, X pointing down here. However, when I get to her elbow, you'll notice that the orientation of the joint is not accurate. We're not actually going to be able to get her to bend her elbow the right way. So essentially, one of these joints should be pointing directly out the back of the elbow. This is kind of important. We really need to make sure that this is lined up exactly the way that we want it to. Otherwise, when it goes time to move her elbow, that rotation, if I set my orientation of my tool here to world, or not to world, to object as well, you'll see that her elbow can't bend the right way. It doesn't actually bend in this direction, right? It should bend in line with the arm, and it's not. So we need to go and realign these things in order to make them work. Now, this can be a little bit tricky to do this, but I'll kind of walk you through this and how we're going to do this. We're going to rotate the local rotation axes of these things to make sure that they do line up the right way. So when we go and rotate these things, there's a couple of things that we want to remember that we want to keep in line. So first, we're going to want to make sure that our rotation axis is always, X is always the only direction that we move. So when we go and fix our rotation, we're only going to be fixing the X. That's the only thing that we're going to be allowed to move. Don't move the Z, because that's going to break things. And don't move the Y, because that's going to break things. X is the only one that we're going to be allowed to rotate. To do this, we first need to change our selection type. So right now, we are on select by object type, which means I can click on a joint and the joint becomes selected. What we want to do instead, and I'm going to grab the entire of my hierarchy here when I do this, I'm going to switch to select by component type. I'm going to turn that on. This is going to allow us to select a component of the joint and not necessarily the joint itself. The next thing that I want to do is open up the selection menu beside it here. There's a little open menu button here, and I'm going to go and select the question mark, which is to select the miscellaneous elements of the joints. This is going to allow me now to select by selecting and dragging over the joint its orientation. And now I can go and orient this so that it's going to spin the right way. Again, in this case, Z is the axis of bend, right? It should be bending along the Y. So if I go and orient this so that Y is pointing forward like that, you can see that this is now lined up with that joint. Now, when she bends her arm in this axis, it looks correct. This is also why we're going to do this before we go and mirror the joints, is that once this is set up correctly, it'll just work correctly all the way through. So just checking to make sure that her breast is set up correctly, and it is. I'll go and grab her hand, and again, her hand is not set up correctly. Again, the only axis I have available to me to rotate is the X. And so I'm going to rotate this until that joint, again, is set up correctly. Now, what I'm looking at here is these, and you can see them tiny little gizmos in her elbow. I want to make sure that I'm trying to point that Y-axis outwards. Okay, so in this one, I should probably rotate it all the way around until Y is backwards. Like so. And then in this one, Y is pointing up, which is going to work well. I'll go and select that. Okay. So again, I'm looking at the little gizmo, and Y is pointing up out of the joint. When we get into her knuckles, we're going to do them in a different direction. We want to make sure that in this case, the spread of her fingers is going to be along Y. And this is going to make it so that, again, we have a little bit of an easier time doing that rotation. So that means that Z should be pointing up through the knuckle. Okay, so we'll start with her thumb here. Okay, so I want to make sure that Z is pointing up and out of the joint. That one's fine. That one's fine. That one's fine. And again, the nub here is not going to matter. It's rotation. It doesn't matter how broken it is. We're not weighting to it, but it's here so that X has something to point at. So that looks good. I'll now go into her index. And again, I'm going to rotate this until Z is pointing up and out of the knuckle. Okay. We'll grab the next one. We'll rotate this again until Z is pointing up and out of the knuckle. And Z is pointing up and out of the knuckle. Onto the middle. There we have it. Make sure I get this lined up here as best I can. Beneficial to get your camera in a position where you can actually look down the joint. That looks good. Z up, and finally Z up. That looks good. We're going to look at her hip here, and again, we can see that it's not lined up the way that we want. I'm going to point Y forward on her hip. Again, trying to line this up with the angle of her knee. Her knee. Again, we're going to point that Y forward. That looks good. Her ankle. Looks good. The ball of her foot. Looks good. Okay, so we look to be in a pretty good position here in terms of the orientation of all of these things now. So with that done, I'm going to turn off the miscellaneous selection type, and I'm going to return back to select by object type, just to make sure that we don't go and reconfigure these things here without wanting to. And now that they're all configured correctly, we can go and add the twist bones to the system here. In order to add the twist bones in the way that they are added to the skeleton in the Unreal character, we're going to need to make sure that we actually have them parented in the right way, and that we actually have them set up orientation wise in the right way, so that their positions are exactly where they're supposed to be. And so these are a little bit different for each joint that exists. So let's start with the arm here. So first, the twist joint for the upper arm is actually in the exact same place as the upper arm joint itself. To do this, I'm going to grab that joint, upper arm, and I'm going to hit Control D. That's going to duplicate the upper arm. Now, it's actually duplicated the entire hierarchy, which I can delete. The upper arm is the only one that I want a clone of. I'm going to rename this. It's not going to be upper arm. It's going to be, what do they call it? Upper arm twist 01, I believe is the right name for this thing. Upper arm, I'm just referencing here. Yep, upper arm underscore twist underscore 01 underscore L. So that's what we're going to do this. So upper arm underscore twist underscore 01 underscore L. So there, that joint is in now the right place. It's exactly where the shoulder is, which is good. The next one we're going to do is the lower arm twist. The lower arm twist needs to find itself at the halfway point between the lower arm and the hand. The root of this joint is going to be the lower arm. So to create it, I'm going to grab the hand, since it's the first joint parented to that elbow as well. I will duplicate it and delete all of the finger children in the duplicate. We're going to go and rename this one. Okay. And this is going to be called, actually, I think I did this incorrectly. Let's delete this joint too. It's actually the elbow that I want to duplicate. So the reason I want to duplicate the elbow is that to move it along the joint, we need to move it in the X. So I'm going to duplicate the lower arm. We'll delete all of the children of the lower arm. And then I can go and move that lower arm down. Now, when I do so, I have to make sure that this lower arm is parented to the right joint. So it needs to be parented, lower arm 1 needs to be parented to lower arm. Now I can move it down and put it in the halfway point of our arm here. And we can give it a rename proper. So lower arm underscore twist underscore 01 underscore L. So I just want to double check my hierarchy here that I don't have anything outlandish. I'm just checking this by moving things and resetting them. So, okay, we look good. So we should have two joints up in here. The upper arm twist, and I'm going to go and increase its size to 3.5. Right, so that way we can actually select it. So there's the twist, the larger one. And then there's the shoulder itself, the smaller one. Now, it's really important that this twist joint that you create in the lower arm be exactly along the line, exactly along the directionality of the lower arm. The reason for that is that it needs to exist at the halfway point or near enough to the halfway point, but it needs to be exactly on the bone. Otherwise, when the hand twists, you're going to get a shearing effect on the forearm that is not going to be what you want. And so to line that up perfectly, it needs to be created from the elbow and moved down. We're going to do the same thing with the lower leg here. So again, we're going to create a clone of the upper leg. Duplicate. I'm going to go into said clone. And I'm going to delete everything else but that clone, which I can now rename upper leg twist _1 _ L. Okay, and then same thing. I'm going to clone the upper leg again. No, I'm going to clone the lower leg. And we're going to move this down. So again, the lower leg is pointing at the foot in X, exactly the way that we want it to. And it's actually going to move, when we create the clone, directly along the bone's length until we get to the halfway point. So grab the lower leg, duplicate it, delete the children, grab that bone, move it halfway, actually reparent it now, lower leg to the leg, and now we can move it halfway down, like so, and we can now rename it. So this is going to be lower leg _ twist _1 _ L. Okay, that should be all of the anatomical bones now done, with the exception of anything that needs to be mirrored. The next step we're going to do is to create the mirrors. We're going to create the other joints on the other side of the body that weren't created in this process. The way that we do this is by simply selecting the parentmost joint of something that is mirrored, and we're just going to mirror it. In the skeleton tool, there is a mirror joints. I'm going to open up the settings, and we want to make sure that our mirror axis is our center line. So for us, that's YZ. So I don't want XY, I want YZ. That's our center line. Mirror function, we're going to use behavior, and then we're going to replace the name as well. We're going to replace _L with _R. So then when it makes the clones, anywhere where it finds an _L, it's going to replace it with an _R. So all of the joints should get automatically named correctly. I'm going to select her clavicle _L, and hit apply. That should create the joints along the axis the right way. Now, you can see here that that's not the case. It actually mirrored it incorrectly here. The reason for that is that it mirrored it along XY, but it mirrored it along the bone's XY, not the world's XY. So we're going to undo that. We're going to grab that joint again. Let's grab the parentmost joint here. This should be the clavicle. And let's go back to XY and hit apply. Oh, I was in X. That's why. I was in the wrong axis. I was in XZ. I wanted YZ. So there we go. So now that I have this in the right orientation, we now have the bones created properly in the right side. If we go check their names, clavicle _L, upper arm L or R, sorry, everything seems to, oh, there is a couple. I didn't rename her breasts. So let's do that before we mirror them. So breast _L and the nub. XNUB _ breast _L. All right, so we can go and mirror those now. I'll grab the bone that is the root of where things are mirrored. So again, nothing along the center here. I'm grabbing the one that is out. I hit apply, and we should get the breasts on the right side. I'll grab her hip and apply. Now, it looks like I didn't grab the hip. It looks like that was the twist bone. So let's go and increase the size of the twist bone here while I have it. And there is a hierarchical problem. No, that looks okay. The hierarchical problem, I think actually we're okay here. I'm just looking at the hierarchy of the hip socket and where it's supposed to go. I want to make sure that when I set this up correctly here, that the hip is parented in the right way, or that twist bone is parented the right way. So we want to make sure that the twist is a child of the same joint as it is in the skeleton of the white robot. So essentially, the way that they've parented it is the way that we parent it. So making sure that a twist bone for them is a twist bone for us, and that its parent is our parent. Otherwise, we're going to get some funky behavior when we bring this into the engine. I'm just looking up here. I'm doing this on my other monitor, which is why you can't see it. But I just want to make sure that the twist, that the parenting is set up correctly. Looking at the entirety of the hierarchy here. Yeah, so the twist joints need to be parented to the joint by the same name. So that's where things have gone wrong here. So if I grab her twist joint on her shoulder and I move this up, you can see there's another connection to the clavicle, which it shouldn't have. So I'm going to grab the twist, I'm going to shift select the shoulder, and I'm going to hit P. So now if I grab the twist and I move it up, you'll see that it creates a triangle from that shoulder, which is what we want. I'm going to do that all the way through. Shoulder, grab the twist, grab the shoulder and hit P, so they're parented the right way. And do the same thing here. Twist, hip, P. And then same thing here. This one is already parented to the forearm. Right? That's why we have that second cone there. So that works well. This one is already parented the right way, so it works well. So that means in order to clone the leg, I should just need to grab the hip and hit apply, and we should get that leg parented correctly. Lastly, I've got to do her eyes, the joints that I've made to make her eyes. That is the eye left, upper eyelid, center, upper eyelid, lower center. And we're going to apply that as well. I think I need to do one at a time. Eye, mirror, upper eyelid, mirror, lower eyelid, mirror. There we are. Okay. Anatomically, I'm pretty happy with what I've got. Everything here now seems to line up exactly with where her anatomy is. Again, with the exception of her feet, where I've gone in and I'm using the boots. But this looks to be lined up pretty well. If we go and hide the avatar layer and bring back her costume, this should mean now that the joints are in the right place, even though we can't quite see the anatomy here in exactly the same way. The next thing that I need to do is I need to now add joints for the costume. I need to now add joints that are going to move bits and pieces of her clothing, not just her body, not just the anatomy. Now, these joints obviously are going to be different than what's in the white robot. These are joints that are going to have zero animation when we bring this character into Unreal. But they're joints that we can either add physics to, or that we can keyframe ourselves in the engine, or add some kind of a algorithm to how these joints would move in order to make sure that the character kind of behaves the right way, or things move in the right way. So for instance, if we take costume, let's start with costume number 1. So costume number 1 is a fairly short skirt that you can see she's wearing. And there's not really a lot of movement here that I'm going to really need to worry about. Everything is pretty form fitting. The only thing that I might want to adjust here on this character is to maybe have a few joints hang down from her skirt that would allow me to move that skirt based off animation. So the skirt is overlapping both in the front and the back, where there is a front panel or an outer panel and an inner panel. And those would definitely look better with two separate sets of joints. So if I had a set of joints that move the outer panel and a set of joints that move the inner panel, I think that would work fairly well. I can also just make sure that they stay together. Now, the reason that there is a flap here that this opens is if she were to spread her legs even further, that's where the skirt would have some give in it so that she actually could do that. And then the same thing exists here in the front, where she's got an inner flap and an outer flap, again, to allow this thing to have a little bit of give in it. And so I'm going to put a couple of just fairly basic joints in here to kind of help manipulate and move this garment separate from her actual anatomy. Now, again, these are going to get mirrored. I'm going to keep the mirror options open here because I'm going to use that again. But these are going to get mirrored in kind of the same way. I'm just going to go and hide the shared so her hand is out of the way. And we're going to bring this. Let's go and look at this in wireframe. I'm just kind of trying to look at where I want to set the root for this joint. I'm going to start about here and end down here. I'll hit enter. And this is going to be one of the joints that I use to control the skirt. Now, I don't want this to be dead center. I'm actually going to try and line these up with her legs a little bit more. So this is going to come out this way. And this one's going to come out this way. Something a little bit more like that. And I actually don't want just two joints here. I'm going to want to actually have more of them. But what I'm doing is I'm setting up that clean angle first. I'm setting up that straight line first. And then I'll go and add additional joints to it. Yeah, so I think that's fine. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to place maybe 3 joints along the length here. Which I think is going to give me kind of the idea. It's going to give me the root of what I'm looking at here. So I'm going to need to orient these joints as well. Let's do that before we do anything else. We're going to grab skeleton and orient joints, which should line them up automatically. Again, I'm going to need to fix that orientation, right? I don't want that axis pointing out in that direction. It should actually match the angle that her leg is on so that it can move in that direction. So I'm going to go to my component selection, miscellaneous, select that joint, go to rotate. And again, I can only rotate on X. And I want to make sure that Y is pointing forward. Like that. Okay. I'm pleased with that. Turn off the miscellaneous, go back to component. And now we can go and add a couple of extra bones along this joint's length. To do that, under skeleton, I'm going to go to insert joint. And the way the insert joint tool works is that you can click on a joint and you can drag along its length to create an additional joint. So here I'm clicking on the main joint, and as I drag down, it goes down in the direction that it's facing. I'm just going to try and place 3 joints here in a chain as even as I can. Something like that. Now, these will have all inherited the orientation of the first joint, or at least it should have. And so let's go and set our orientation here on these things too. Skeleton, orient joints. Okay, And now we'll have to go, and again, I want to reorient these things so that they line up the right way. We'll select the first one. And again, Y should be pointing forward. Select the second one. Y should be pointing forward. Try and line this up so I'm looking along the joints here. Finally, the third joint. And then the last one doesn't matter again. But those should now be all aligned in a fairly straight line. Like so. So that gives us, again, now a nice, clean setup for that. So this is going to help me when her leg bends at the hip and her leg comes up. I'll be able to use this to kind of bend the skirt up a little bit too, so that it's like the skirt is actually impacting her thigh. I'm going to want to reproduce these joints as well, and I'm going to want to put them both on the side of her hip for when her leg moves outwards, and I'm going to want to put them kind of hanging off the back of her butt as well when they move in that direction. Okay, so first I'm going to duplicate these, and we'll move the duplicates over to the side. Like so. Again, I'm going to try and place them just inside here. Using move. I can go down the joints and make sure that they follow the shape of the skirt. Oh, we can go and orient the joints so that they point at one another. With the joints selected, we'll go into Selection, Miscellaneous, and we'll orient them again so that our Z-axis or our Y-axis points out, so that we're rotating about Z. That one looks good. That one looks good. That one looks good. And again, I needn't worry about the final joint in the chain. There we are. I'm going to duplicate those. Control D. And I'm going to move these ones around to her backside. And again, I'm trying to line them up with where her leg is. And here, I actually want to make sure, so again, from the side view here, we're going to move in. I want to make sure that this rear joint here does actually find itself where the fabric leaves her bottom. And again, we'll try and keep this as even as possible. That looks decent. Again, we'll go and select that joint. I haven't named any of these things yet, so we're going to have to go and do that. We're going to go to Skeleton, Orient, so they're all pointing in the right direction. We're going to switch our selection type, select the first joint, go to Rotation, and again, I'm going to rotate this until that little Y is pointing outwards. In this case, it's going to be pointing backwards. Like so. And like so, again, with no need to select the bottom joint. I can turn that off. And I now have enough joints on her skirt that I'll be able to manipulate that. We should go and name these. Now, depending on what your character looks like, obviously these types of joints are going to change from character to character, depending on what type of fabric they have and clothing and where that clothing goes. You're going to want to go and manipulate these things to make sure that you're actually getting the shape that you want. So I'm going to call these things skirt. underscore front underscore 01 underscore L. And I will go and rename. We're going to go and copy the name of this thing. Actually, I'll copy the entire name and we'll paste it in here. Just adding a 2. Paste it. Adding the 3. And then finally, xnub underscore skirt underscore front. Okay. Continue the pattern along the side. Skirt underscore side underscore 01 underscore L. Copy the whole name. Open up the children. Paste. 2. Paste. 3. xnub underscore skirt underscore side underscore L. And then finally the ones at the back. Skirt underscore rear underscore 01 underscore L. Copy the whole name. Paste the whole name. 2. Paste 3. And then xnub underscore skirt underscore rear underscore L. I can grab the 3 parentmost joints of the skirt. And I'm going to click on her pelvis and parent them. This is going to ensure that her skirt moves with the pelvis, making sure that any kind of motion that she does with her hips or anything like that will move along with it. So excellent. Now we're going to grab skirt rear 1, side and front, and we're going to mirror those. We're going to do one at a time. Skirt rear, mirror. Skirt side, mirror. And skirt front, mirror. There we are. Excellent. So now we've got all the joints we need for her skirt. This costume shouldn't actually need anything else. Most of what I'm seeing here should be just fine in terms of rigging. Now, I'm going to hide costume 1 and I'm going to bring out costume 2. In costume 2, there are slightly different things that we need to animate. These are going to be mainly the long flowy bit of scarf that she's got hanging down here. Now, if you look at this, it almost lines up really nicely with the joints that we've got that create her skirt. Now, that's brilliant. That's actually kind of what we want. All it means is that we're probably going to add a few more joints in here and move these nubs down to the end. Also, if I look at the waistcoat at her back, the joints for her skirt line up almost perfectly with that as well. So excellent. I won't really need to make changes there. The next place that I want to look at is her collar. She has a very tall collar, goes right up to the base of her skull here. And the problem with that is that if she were to rotate her neck, if she were to tilt her head to one side, her head would move and influence that collar. It would make that collar shift. And currently, I don't have anything that's going to make the collar move in the right way. So I'm going to throw a couple of joints in throughout the collar that I can use to manipulate it. Now, here at the back, I can actually just rig it to the neck, and it should work just fine. But out here, I actually want to have a couple of joints that run the length of the collar just to be able to move it, to be able to have it kind of ripple a little bit. It's meant to be fabric, and I kind of want to make sure that it kind of holds that look. So I'm going to go to my side view, and I'm going to do this kind of here. So we're going to go and create a couple of joints. And I'm going to do this first here. And then I'm going to do one more. Grab my joint tool again. Here. In fact, I may make that first set of joints. Let's get out a wireframe display. I may bring this back a little bit further so it's a little bit more in line with her neck here. Okay, so now I just want to line these up. Move it back here. And I want to make sure that it's in the actual fabric of the collar because that's where it's going to move from. And then we can move this joint until it's actually in the end of the collar. Not too bad. And then we'll do the same thing with the next one. Move it over until it's in the collar. Grab the nub. And we'll move the nub into the right place. I'm going to go and set up my orientation on these joints. I'm just going to make sure that we have everything selected, including the nubs. Skeleton, orient joints. Make sure that they're pointing the right way. So I think that one's fine. I think this one needs a little bit of editing here. So we're going to go into its component. Go and select it. And I just want to line it up with the collar. Like so. Okay, that's going to work a little bit better. So now you can see its rotation is right along the collar. The only other thing that I want to do now is just give it one more joint in there. So I'm going to go to Insert Joint, and we're going to go and create, if I can get the angle correct here, another joint midway up, like so, and another midway joint up here. Okay. So now I can go and name these, set up their hierarchy, and mirror them. So we're going to go and open up the hierarchy here. So joint number 1, this is going to be collar underscore. We want side underscore 01 underscore L. I'll copy that name. Go into joint 2 and name it. And then X nub underscore collar underscore L. Side underscore L. And then we can do the same thing here. Collar underscore front underscore 01 underscore L. Copy the whole name. Paste the whole name. Change the 1 to a 2. And then X nub underscore collar underscore front underscore L. Right. Next, we can go and take those 2 joints. And I'm going to parent them again to her chest using P. So when her chest moves, those move, and then I can move them independently. I'll grab the 1 and mirror it, the other and mirror it. And we now have the bones to move our collar. And now we just have to go and change the joints that we've made for her skirt to work a little bit better. Now to do this, I'm going to delete the chain on the right, and I'm going to go and manipulate the chain on the left. The way that I'm going to do this is by adding some more joints in here. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to replace the nub with a joint. So I'm going to go in, we're going to deselect to my insert joints, and I'm going to go and add another joint to this one. If I can get my selection to click here in the right place, there we go. And I'm going to bring it down here as far as I can. About there. Okay, we'll go and open that chain. I'm going to grab the nub, and I'm now going to move the nub all the way down. Like so. Now, I would like this to get a little bit closer to the scarf. And hopefully that still lines up well enough with the skirt, which I believe it does. And now I'm just going to add a couple more joints to make sure that we have the same kind of length going on here. Okay, so we're going to go to skeleton and we're going to insert joint. And I'll pull this one down. And I'll pull this one down. We're going to go and ensure that our orientations are still set up in the right way, which they don't appear to be. And so we'll grab everything that was just made and we'll orient to joints, skeleton, orient. We're going to go and turn on our selection type, miscellaneous. And again, line these up so that that Y is pointing forward. All the way down. Again, this bottom one doesn't matter because it's the nub. We'll leave it like that. We'll get out of our selection type, back into component mode. And I should now be able to, let's go and rename the last few joints here. I'm going to copy the name and rename this skirt 4, skirt 5, and skirt 6. Now, these lower bones, 4, 5, and 6, aren't going to do anything in the first costume where they aren't needed. Nothing was going to get weight painted to these. But they're still going to allow the skirt to move properly in bones 1, 2, and 3. And so that's how that's going to work. We can go and turn this off, and we now have enough joints to be able to move this thing in exactly the way that we want. So that's going to work out quite nice. All I need to do now is just go and reset up the mirror on this joint that I didn't create on the other side, like so. And just like that, we now have a completed rig that we're going to be able to go and manipulate and play with when we get our character going. So at this point, I'm going to go and save my file. Again, remembering that I'm actually in a rig file that I created. And go close this off. And I now have all the joints that I need. Now I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup in my file here as well, which is going to include removing all of the reference layers. Actually, let's turn them all back into reference layers for a second and hide their visibility. The reason for that is we can go and put our skeleton onto a new layer, which we'll call joint layer. And we'll save that. We're going to make sure that everything on there is there. Now we can hide the rig, which is nice. I'm going to go and unhide everything else. I'm going to get everything else off of reference. I'm going to grab the avatar layer. And this is the one with the naked version of my character. We'll go and delete her. She's not needed. and we can delete that layer. And we'll just save it again, and we should be good. Everything should be ready for a initial weight painting and a test to make sure that this is going to work exactly the way that we want it to, and then we're going to be able to put this thing together in a way that is going to make the most sense. So yeah, we'll save that off, and when we come back to this here in the next video, we're going to be taking a look at weight painting and getting this character set up to work properly with the skeleton so that we can bring it into Unreal and see her running around and doing the things that she's meant to do. Until then, I'll talk to you next time, and thanks for watching.